is April, which means we are now only 2 weeks away from the start of the 2024 Canadian Premier League season, and another month has passed, which means we can run through the last month of off-season transfers in the Canadian Premier League. March, with the start of training camps for the Canadian Premier League, had less transfers than the previous months, January and February, however, had some massive moves as teams basically finalized their rosters heading into April and the start of the Canadian Premier League season. Let's start right off with the biggest move, not just of this month, not just of this offseason, but the biggest move in Canadian Premier League history. Manny Aparicio signing with Atletico Ottawa. When it was announced back in December that Manny Aparicio was leaving Pacific, it spawned the biggest manhunt in Canadian Premier League history. Aparicio was in talks with basically every team in the Canadian Premier League, as well as the Vancouver Whitecaps and Toronto FC. And by January, it seemed like the two frontrunners were Ottawa and Halifax. And in the end, Atletico Ottawa, building the super team that they are, get their man. Aparicio, the central midfielder, has previously played for both York 9 and Pacific FC, winning the 2021 Canadian Premier League Championship with Pacific FC. He's been a finalist for each of the past two CPL Player of the Year awards, the only player who has been a finalist for the CPL Player of the Year awards more than once, besides Kyle Becker. Season in, season out, touted as one of the best players in the Canadian Premier League. Manny Aparicio going to Atletico Ottawa turns them from a very, very good team to a great team. This is an Ottawa team that now looks to be, on paper, the best in the league. It's not coming as a cheap cost, as although we don't know the exact financial numbers, it sounds like through the rumor mill that this contract is worth about 10% of the CPL salary cap, making Manny Aparicio the highest paid player in Canadian Premier League history. This is an Ottawa team with, in addition to the addition of Balou Tabla and Chris Twardek, has just stacked up offensively. They are going to score a boatload of goals this season, and adding Manny Aparicio to it now means that this is a team that's looking like they might have an unstoppable offense. In addition to Manny Aparicio, this month Ottawa also brought in on loan from Toronto FC Luke Singh, a guy who was on loan with Ottawa last season and was on loan with Edmonton 2 seasons ago. So a CPL regular at this point. It wouldn't surprise me if when his TFC contract ends, Luke Singh ends up signing permanently in Ottawa, but just another guy with stability on the back end for Ottawa, as it looks like their center back situation was going to be their weakest position going into this season. They bring back Luke Singh from last year. Just a notable thing to throw out there as they continue to stack up. We're going to slide on down Ontario to Forge FC for these next couple transfers. Now, Forge, very, very quiet in the first couple months of the off season. In classic Forge fashion, went and made some big signings late. First move they did of the month was brought in Mexican defender Daniel Parra on loan from Monterrey in Liga MX. High profile loan in for Forge in this guy. A 24-year-old left back with 26 matches of experience in Liga MX, 21 of which with Giants Monterrey, and a couple more seasons of experience on loan in the Mexican second tier to Liga de Expansión. Solid left back pickup. He should be a very solid player in the Canadian Premier League. A bit weird that he plays the same position as Kwasi Poku. Makes me worry about the status of Kwasi Poku's injury, or if we're going to play Poku, maybe switch either Parra or Poku to right back sometimes this season, experiment with that, or play Poku further up the field because Poku has come in as a winger at times. But a very solid, stable left back option for Forge picked up on loan. Another pickup for Forge on loan, 18-year-old midfielder Matteo Schiavoni has been loaned in from CF Montreal. Schiavoni spent the last couple of years in the Bologna Academy over in Italy. Now turning 19 this April, he's come over to sign with CF Montreal and then immediately been loaned out to Forge FC. A very intriguing young midfielder option depending on how the Forge midfield, which mainly right now should be Hojabrapor, Jensen, Becker, and Cisse, plays out for the course of the season with injuries and whatnot. Schiavoni will likely get a lot of chances to play in that Forge midfield. Very good move for his development and a player who could end up being a very solid piece for Forge this season. If he gets some more minutes than expected, he could be a dark horse for the U21 Canadian Player of the Year award. Nice, solid pickup for Forge, adding in needed depth in the midfield. And Forge's third move of the month, a very intriguing one, signing Czech goalkeeper Jason Kolilat. Jason Kolilat is a Czech-born keeper who came to the US to play NCAA football and go to college in the US. Following his college career, was drafted by LAFC in the MLS Super Draft, played 7 games for LAFC, 2 in MLS Next Pro in the 2023 season, and now has signed with Forge FC. Interesting move, as Forge has not run 2 goalies really ever. This is a guy who seems like could be a solid, usable keeper in the Canadian Premier League, which for a Forge backup goalie to have a guy who is going to challenge Tristan Henry for minutes is not the usual MO, which opens up the whole Tristan Henry can of worms from February when Henry did not play in the club's CONCACAF Champions Cup matches due to personal reasons. There was rumors that he was trying to force a transfer to the USL Championship. No updates on the Tristan Henry front as of yet, but if Henry were to leave, Kolilat is the type of guy who could be a potential starting keeper for Forge this season. So that's just another piece in that Tristan Henry puzzle. Add to the fact that Chris Kalongo is still around, Forge right now currently have 3 keepers in a league where having 3 keepers is not the norm. So this signing, a guy who could probably be a usable keeper in the Canadian Premier League for Forge, and honestly, it's hard to judge what to make of this transfer yet if Tristan Henry is not out the door, because if this guy's a backup keeper, this is a terrific backup keeper signing for Forge for this season. If Tristan Henry is out the door, then he's a starting keeper, and that's a different conversation because he's a bit of an unproven and an international spot being used on a kind of unproven at the professional level keeper is an interesting signing for a Canadian Premier League team, especially considering Nico Giansopoulos was available just up the road at York. Speaking of York United, one of the biggest sales of the Canadian Premier League offseason occurred out of York this month. Osaze de Rosario has been sold to the Tacoma Defiance in MLS Next Pro. The Tacoma Defiance are the Seattle Sounders MLS Next Pro team. De Rosario follows what's actually becoming a pretty solid lineup of former York United players to go and play now to MLS Next Pro. A guy who's been a solid striker with York in each of the past 2 years, could have potentially been in the Golden Boot race this past season had he stayed away from edibles, but a solid striker who York a year ago signed on a 2-year deal with the explicit intent of having him play a year and then selling him off in the off season. And a solid piece of business for York. It does leave them with a pretty big hole in the number 9 slot. This is a team that I really liked what they were building this season, and not having Osaze de Rosario at the number 9 slot for the season going forward, it does hurt their standing in my preseason predictions, which will come out next week. But de Rosario is still young enough that he can go impress at MLS Next Pro and break into MLS if things go well with the Tacoma Defiance. And so best of luck to de Rosario, and hopefully either this year or next year we see him suiting up for the Seattle Sounders. No other moves from the East or even the Middle West in the Canadian Premier League this season. We got to go all the way to Vancouver FC to find the next big moves. Zach Verhoeven signing with Vancouver FC for this season. Zach Verhoeven, like Noah Verhoeven, the two Verhoevens very similar in terms of their status in the Canadian Premier League. Solid midfield pickup. Not a guy who you'd have starting game in, game out on a real contending team in the CPL, but a solid midfield option for Vancouver this season. In addition, Vancouver FC also brought in former Valor striker Moses Dyer, a solid number 2 striker option behind Alejandro Diaz, but again, not a groundbreaking transfer by any means. Solid player, will help Vancouver this season, but doesn't shake any ground in terms of pushing them up into contender status. On to the Vancouver Island, to Pacific FC. Pacific FC signed 26-year-old Romanian midfielder Andrei Turcovenu. Turcovenu, a guy with a boatload of experience in the first and second tiers of Romanian football. He should be quite a solid midfielder in the Canadian Premier League, quite a solid presence in the Canadian Premier League, a guy with a lot of professional experience over in Europe, albeit in a lower quality European league, but a guy who just has played a lot of professional football across the pond coming over to Pacific. Solid guy. Pacific also signed 19-year-old defender slash midfielder Christian Greco-Taylor, a Calgary native who spent last season with the Whitecaps 2 in MLS Next Pro, making 21 appearances. A solid MLS Next Pro pickup guy, very young player, another guy who could put up a very good season to be a dark horse runner for the U21 Canadian Player of the Year award, and a guy who could be a solid player for Pacific for years to come. The type of young player who at 19 coming in with already some professional experience is a guy who could be a big building block for your team for years to come. Couple solid pickups for Pacific. None of them replace the gaping hole that Aparicio leaves, but guys who are going to be solid players in the CPL and are solid pickups for a team that's looking like they're going to be in and around the playoff fight. So that does it for the biggest transfers from March in the Canadian Premier League. The Aparicio saga is done and dusted. The only real big question marks that remain on the transfer front is what's going to happen with Tristan Henry and Amer Didic, who apparently is training with Ottawa too, so why don't they just go and get everyone? The season starts in 2 weeks. It's looking like it's going to be the most competitive season in Canadian Premier League history. Stay tuned next week for my season preview / predictions video. I'm going to talk a lot more in depth about how I think every team's going to do this season then. And always, if you like my videos, hit like. If you want to see more of my stuff, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter. Link is down below in the description, and I will see you next time.